We're back, baby. Hello, and welcome to the history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game. Join me as we venture into the dark past to bear witness to the game's earliest years. This is the second part of an ongoing series. If you haven't, please check out the previous video. Let's begin, shall we? With the release of the official guide starter book, so came the expert rules. According to rule sheets distributed with later booster packs, the expert rules were designed to bring better balance to the card game, remove some elements of luck, and expand the possibility of creating combos. The expert rules originally coexisted with the previous rules, with the earlier rule set being renamed the junior rules. The brand new expert rules were to be used at all tournaments going forward. Under these new rules, players needed to tribute summon monsters with a level higher than 4. To anyone who plays the game today, the newly introduced tribute summon mechanic should be very familiar. You need 1 tribute for levels 5 and 6, and 2 for levels above 6. This is a heavy cost and greatly elevated the status of lower level monsters. In addition, the magic and trap limit was abolished. Finally, more than 1 spell or trap could be played or set in a single turn. This actually didn't have a huge effect at the time, because with that card pool, there weren't many situations in which multiple spells or traps would be played at once. However, this had huge implications for the future. These rules also allowed for the possibility of quick effect cards, which would be seen later. As well, monsters could be fused from the hand, slightly improving fusion monsters, but not by much. Original expert rules are more similar to rules in place today than the official rules. However, there were still some major differences, such as there not being a hand size limit. Konami clearly thought ahead to the future when creating these rules. After all, where were they supposed to go? Were they supposed to start creating monsters better than Blue Eyes? Under the original rules, monsters would have had 10,000 attack within years. How did the game's environment change as a result of these new rules? High-level monsters obviously took the biggest hit. It was suddenly very hard to justify the cost of a Blue Eyes or a Dark Magician, and it was hardly worth it to include more than a few high-level monsters in your deck. You could now easily brick by building your deck incorrectly, which was pretty hard to do previously. The value of low-level monsters greatly increased, now taking up half of a deck, with cards like Celtic Guardian now becoming staples. Curse of Dragon, previously the 4th best monster, became the most useful high-level monster due to only requiring a single tribute. Wall monsters like Mystical Elf and Spirit of the Harp were now essential. Equip cards became a bit more valuable since the average attack greatly lowered. Swords of Revealing Light grew even better due to helping players get high-level monsters onto the field, as did Monster Reborn since it allowed you to summon a monster to use as a tribute without wasting your normal summon. Even Fissure increased in usefulness, because it's a great asset to use against wall monsters which generally have low attack power. Players around since the beginning now found themselves taking those old weak monsters out from storage. I personally think that the introduction of the expert rules may be the single most important thing to ever happen in the history of the game. It ensured the game's longevity and added a whole new level of strategy. Let's face it, the game was pretty much broken under the original rules and barely had any value beyond the cards being collector's items for fans of the manga and anime. This is a very interesting time. Let's see how these new rules influence Konami and the creation of new cards. Booster 2. Booster 2 released on May 25th, being the first new release in almost 2 months. Konami sold it in vending machines like Booster 1, and it once again featured only commons and rares. Looking at the card list, we can see that the new rules had an effect on the cards coming out. The rares this time consist of the monsters with the highest attack power in the set, with none being over level 6. The most notable here is Rogue Doll, a level 4 monster with 1600 attack, which takes the place of the best low-level monster. None of the high-level monsters introduced here were better than Curse of Dragon, but were still useful for those who didn't happen to have that card, despite them being terrible now. It was important for Konami to introduce new 1-tribute monsters in this set, since Curse of Dragon was previously the only one. Konami was still clearly trying to figure out exactly how to define the levels of the monsters. If tribute summoning existed since the beginning, I imagine monster levels would have been better defined and less arbitrary. Equip cards have been demoted to the common slot. Despite this, the equip cards introduced this time are slightly better than the ones of the past, since each one improves a monster's attack by 400 points rather than 300. They take a hit to their defense value though. Also, these equip cards target a monster with a specific attribute rather than a specific type. At the time, there were 19 types and only 6 attributes, so these equip cards affect a greater number of monsters. Unsurprisingly, no new trap cards were introduced here, but we did get 4 new spells. Dark Piercing Light was pretty useful in this environment since players walling up with 2000 defense monsters was common. This card will become even more useful very soon, and we'll see why. The Inexperienced Spy allows you to see a card in your opponent's hand, and it's just a terrible card even at the time. Soul of the Pure increases your life points, and Ukazi inflicts burn damage. Imagine if Konami still continued the trend of constantly introducing a stronger heal and burn damage card. There might be burn damage cards that inflict 100,000 damage by now. Some of the earliest theme decks revolved around the new equip cards. One deck, called Equipment Beatdown, looked something like this. It involved equipping Rogue Doll with Elf's Light, which bumps its attack value up to 2,000, equal to Curse of Dragon. This, of course, allowed the duelist to rival the strongest monster without needing to sacrifice a monster. It still requires 2 cards, but at least you can get it out faster if you have the 2-card combo in your hand. As an added bonus, Elf's Light works on Blue Eyes White Dragon. You can even equip Mystical Elf or Spirit of the Harp with it in a pinch. Another variant of this deck involves using the Invigoration card with Earth monsters such as Uraby and Bean Soldier. These decks were pretty fun, even in mirror matches. It was exciting seeing just how much you could beef up your monsters, and these decks represented that early Yu-Gi-Oh! Spirit of watching your monsters duke it out. Already, we can see that new rules elevated the game to a new level, with gameplay becoming more interactive and deck construction becoming more complex and variable. However, the game was clearly missing something, some crucial element to make the game more exciting and interesting. Volume 3. Konami recognized this and on May 27, 1999 released Volume 3. Volume 3 is a very important booster pack in that it introduced effect monsters for the first time. Each of the effect monsters introduced functioned as a flip monster, those cards being Armed Ninja, Reaper of the Cards, Hane Hane, Man-Eater Bug, and Scale and Go. Armed Ninja allows the user to destroy a face-up spell card or check a set card and destroy it if it's a spell. This is useful for Swords of Revealing Light, but not much else at the time, especially considering there was no reason for a player to set spell cards. Reaper of the Cards is a counterpart to Armed Ninja, except worse. For one thing, it needs to be tributed. The fact that its defense stat is a ridiculous 1930 instead of at least 2000 makes it not worth it. The other thing is that trap cards were still pretty rare. Reaper of the Cards at that time was basically a means to out-trap Hole. Konami clearly had some very weird rules for how they determined levels at the time. I think they added together the attack and defense of the monster to determine its level, but severely overvalued defense. Hane Hane is a pretty good card that managed to make tribute summoning even worse. When flipped, the controller must choose one monster to be returned to the hand. Man-Eater Bug is a counterpart to Hane Hane. It functions similarly, except that it destroys a monster. Skelengel allows you to draw a card when flipped, but wasn't really worth including in one's deck because a much better card debuted in this set that also allowed you to draw cards. That's right, Pot of Greed debuted in this set as a common. And yeah, Reaper of the Cards was a rare, so Konami clearly thought that Pot of Greed wasn't as good. I don't think I need to tell you how important Pot of Greed is. There's no deck that doesn't benefit from its inclusion. 2 other spell cards were introduced in this set. The other common was Gravedigger Ghoul, which is notable for being the first card to allow a player to banish cards, and was probably introduced as a way to guard against Monster Reborn, albeit a flawed one. Konami introduced one super rare card in this set, Stop Defense. Yeah, they thought Stop Defense was better than Pot of Greed too. Nonetheless, Stop Defense was very important to this slow format, which mostly involved setting monsters. The 2 ultra rares of the set were Red Eyes Black Dragon, probably one of the worst cards in the set in all honesty, and Left Leg of the Forbidden One, the first card of Exodia. From this point on, Konami will introduce 1 Exodia piece per volume and always as an ultra rare, thus making it highly unlikely that anyone would actually get to resolve Exodia back then. But hey, at least they released Skelengel and Pot of Greed just in time. It makes you wonder if these cards were originally invented to support Exodia decks. In our rare slots, we have a few new 1 tribute monsters, none better than Curse of Dragon, and a reprint of Rogue Doll, still the best non-tribute monster. The set also introduced Skull Redbird, which was actually the best 4-star monster in the first ever TCG set, Legacy of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Other than that, we've got a few new lackluster fusion monsters, and as usual, 5 new equip cards. Okay, I take it back. Red Eyes is not the worst card in this set. It's Rare Fish. Not only are its stats terrible, it requires Fusionists, another extremely bad fusion monster. That means this card requires Petite Angel, Mystical Sheep number 2, Fusionist, and 2 polymerizations to summon. And Fusionist, of course, would have needed to already have been summoned to the field. That is just absurd. Rare Fish might actually be the worst card of all time. I mean, seriously, I doubt that anyone back then actually managed to successfully summon this card. I used to think that Fusionist was probably the worst vanilla fusion monster, so imagine my surprise when I learned that there's a monster that actually requires Fusionist as fusion material. And even with all the cards necessary to summon the damn thing, it still can't beat Rogue Doll, which requires literally nothing. The new equip cards increase a monster's attack and defense by 300, but work according to type rather than attribute, which probably makes the ones introduced in Booster 2 better. All in all, Volume 3 was an important set. Here's what a hypothetical Rich Kids deck from that time might have looked like. Yugi Pack, Kaiba Pack, and Jonochi Pack. Next up, on June 1st, Konami released 3 limited edition packs, Yugi Pack, Kaiba Pack, and Jonochi Pack. Each pack contained 3 cards and could be obtained via mail order through Shonen Jump. Yugi's pack contained Millennium Shield, Stuffed Animal, and Flying Penguin. Millennium Shield is a 1 tribute monster with 3000 defense, which is actually absurdly good for the time. It couldn't be taken out by any other monster without equip spells. By the way, Millennium Shield actually supports my hypothesis that Konami based monster levels on their attack and defense together. All other level 5 monsters at this time add up to having a stat total of 3000. For example, Ansatsu's stats add up to 2900, and Akihiron's stats add up to 3100. Thus, monsters with stat totals around the 3000 total were level 5. If you look closely at cards from this era, I bet you can figure out the stat total ranges for each level. Kaiba's pack contained Takraminos, 3-legged zombies, and Yoranzo. Takraminos was decent at the time if you were low on monsters with decent attack. Jonochi's pack was similar to Kaiba's, but contained level 5 monsters instead of level 4 monsters, making it worse altogether. His pack contained Megasonic Eye, Fairy's Gift, and Yamadron. Yugi's pack was the only one worth getting, really, except for those who enjoy collecting, of course. For a collector, I think the cards released in these sets are pretty cool. In June, one could enter a raffle in V-Jump magazine and become eligible to win a set of 3 cards. The magazine announced the winners in their August 1999 issue. 2 sets were released in this raffle, Set A and Set B, and both contained cards were printed in a higher rarity. 50 copies of each set were printed, making these particular cards quite rare. On July 1st, select Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists found in their mail a very special envelope, embossed with Egyptian hieroglyphics and stamped with a familiar logo. It contained an invitation to an upcoming tournament, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters Legend in Tokyo Dome, an event now infamous of the Japanese duelists who remember it. This invitation provides a date, time, and location of the event. August 26, 1999, beginning at 12 o'clock. The back of the invitation tells duelists what to bring and a notice to use public transportation as parking is not available. If anyone could provide an accurate translation of this image, please do. Enclosed within the invitation were 2 passes, one labeled for parents and one labeled for duelists. Duelists in middle or elementary school were required to bring a parent or guardian. Also included was this guide for parents, of which I've included a very rough translation. Feel free to pause and read, but it's not terribly interesting. Next up, and most interesting of all, we have the tournament rules. This tournament worked like the previous tournament. Every entrant receives 2 star chips. By winning a duel, you receive your opponent's star chip. I love this format. It's really fun, but it can certainly lead to toxicity. These rules actually refer to this as a global tournament, which is a complete lie because the card game had not yet been released outside of Japan, and the Game Boy game, which the tournament half focuses on, was never released outside of Japan. The most important thing to note on this document is that it actually includes the first ever limited list. The cards Dark Hole, Raigeki, and Trap Hole were limited to 1 copy each for this tournament. Nowadays, it's assumed that ban and limited lists affect all officially sanctioned events going forward. However, here, it's unclear if this limited list only affects this particular tournament or not. Regardless, for the purposes of this video series, I will assume that this list is in effect until the next limited list takes its place. Finally, each invitation also contained 3 promotional invitation cards: Duelist Kingdom, Set Sail for the Kingdom, and Glory of the King's Hand. I've often seen that these cards were enough for a duelist to gain entry into the tournament. This is not actually the case, and you needed the aforementioned entry pass. Anyway, we'll talk more about the event later. Booster 3. A few days later, on July 5th, Konami released Booster 3. Taking up the rare slots are... Whoa! Konami actually released 4 trap cards in this set, a new record. It is not too bad of a trap lineup for the time. Ultimate Offering is a fantastic card and allows you to pay 500 life points to normal summon or set a monster during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase. There is no once per turn limit, making this a fantastic card both at the time and even today. In fact, it's currently forbidden. This card was probably created as a response to the new Tribute Summon mechanic in order to make it easier to bring out higher level monsters. This card created a lot of confusion at the time, especially because the internet was still in its infancy. Many players thought you could special summon high level monsters without tributing using this card, and some even thought you could bring out fusion monsters. Of course, this card only allows you to normal summon, so this isn't the case. Also included are reinforcements and castle walls, which pump up your monster's attack and defense respectively by 500 points. Pretty good at the time, and helped to make the game more interactive. Finally, we have Reverse Trap, which was obviously created because of reinforcements and castle walls. Konami was really looking to make the game more interactive at this time, a very welcome and great change. The final rare card is Hourglass of Courage. When summoned, its attack and defense are halved until your next end phase, but the original attack and defense double after that. This card is not even really worth talking about. If it actually survives, you can have a monster that's even stronger than Curse of Dragon, but it's very risky, and you're better off just playing an attacking monster or a defensive wall. However, regardless of whether it's good or not, this card is very special because it's one of the first ever non-flipped effect monsters. That's right, non-flipped effect monsters debuted in this set. In addition, Konami also released Dark Artist, Patrol Robo, and Wodan the Resident of the Forest as commons. They are not very good, but still, this is a big step. Our lone spell in the set is Ancient Telescope, which I think was a pretty cool card at the time, and even better then because shuffling your main deck didn't happen as often. Actually, I'm struggling to think of any card that existed at the time which resulted in shuffling. Other than that, this set contains 4 new fusions and a whole bunch of normal monsters. The normal monster lineup wasn't too bad. Beautiful Headhuntress and Great White both have 1600 attack each, making them the best 4-star monsters along with Rogue Doll. Just 3 days later, Konami released Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters II, Dark Duel Stories, a game that would soon be featured at the upcoming tournament at Tokyo Dome. Included with copies of this game were various promotional cards, and it was actually a very good lineup. Those who purchased the game could find themselves with a normal monster, an effect monster, a normal spell, one of the 4 equip spells, or one of the 3 trap spells. That's right, 10 promotional cards in total, which is a bit excessive. Seiyaru is a 2 tribute monster that is worse and harder to summon than Blue Eyes. Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth is notoriously hard to summon. All things considered, this card was a bit easier to summon back then due to there being less options for removal, and due to 2000 defense monsters being harder to get over. Even still, having a 2000 defense monster on the field for 6 turns is excessive. Also, the 2 cards that this card requires, Petite Moth and Cocoon of Evolution, would not be released until Volume 4. Interestingly, this card holds the honor of being the first monster that can special summon itself. Shine Palace, Salamandra, and Insect Armor with Laser Cannon increase a particular monster's attack by 700. This was very good for the time. Had it been easier to obtain these cards, this would have made Fire, Light, and Insect-only decks more viable. Cyber Shield allows you to increase a Harpy Lady or Harpy Lady's sister's attack by 500. Like Petite Moth and Cocoon of Evolution, Harpy Lady and Harpy Lady Sisters were not even out yet. Kunai with Chain is a pretty cool and very interactive card, quite good for the time. The fact that any monster can be equipped with this card makes it notable. It's actually the first indiscriminate equip card in the game. That alone makes it worth including in any deck. Crush Card Virus is just awesome, and it's easily the most complicated effect up to that point. It's not as simple or ridiculously overpowered as its manga or anime counterpart, but it's still very usable for the time. The original version reads something like, tribute a dark monster with an attack power of 1000 or less. For 3 turns, check your opponent's hand and field for monsters with attack of 1500 or more, and destroy them. Acid Trap Hole is the first trap hole variation. It allows you to target one face-down monster, flip it face up, and destroy it if its defense is 2000 or less. If its defense is greater than 2000, it gets flipped back down. This effect was quite useful at the time when players walling up with high defense monsters occurred frequently, and flip monsters weren't especially good yet. Harpy's Feather Duster is a ridiculously good and unbalanced card. I think that goes without saying. The original manga appearance kind of implies that a Harpy Lady needs to be on the field to activate this card, but it never outright says so. I kind of wish this was actually the case because it would have made this card a bit more balanced while also making Harpies more relevant when they eventually release. However, funnily enough, even if you could manage to get 3 of these cards, it wasn't really worth playing all of them at the time. There simply weren't many spell or trap cards that were set or stayed on the field. Trap Hole was banned, and other than Swords of Revealing Light, The only other cards worth destroying are the 3 trap cards I just discussed, which were extremely rare. Believe it or not, out of all of these cards, Kunai with Chain was probably the most useful at the time. Monsters with high attack weren't common enough to necessarily justify putting Crush card in your deck, and more than one Feather Duster was unnecessary for reasons I already mentioned. Kunai was certainly worth including 3 of, however. I believe there's a reason Konami bundled extremely powerful cards like these with Dark Duel Stories. Okay, yeah. Obviously, they wanted to make as much money as possible. However, in an era where buying single cards was extremely difficult or impossible, this was a way to ensure that these cards weren't too common. Back then, you wouldn't see someone with 3 Harpy's Feather Dusters, because that would necessitate them buying many copies of the Game Boy game. This was a way to ensure that these cards were limited without actually putting them on a limited list. You know how, within the universe of the anime, cards like Blue Eyes and Exodia are considered exceptionally rare? This was a way to emulate that. If you met someone who purchased this game new, there was only a 1 in 10 chance that they might have any particular promotional card. I've read in blogs that many players searched high and low for some of these cards, traveling to card shops across the country. If there are any die-hard TCG experts watching this, they might be a little surprised that some of these cards were released in the OCG so early. That's because, unfortunately, most of these cards weren't released in the TCG until much later. Crush Card Virus didn't release until 2008, Kunai with Chain didn't release until 2008, Shine Palace didn't release until 2009, Cyber Shield didn't release until 2011, and Insect Armor with Laser Cannon didn't release until 2013. That's something I take issue with. Now, sure, a card like Cyber Shield might not seem that important, but it still would have been cool to have earlier. As a huge fan of GOAT format, which is basically summer of 2005 Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's especially disappointing to me because there are quite a few Dungeon Monsters era cards that I would love to play around with, but weren't available in the TCG until later, which makes them illegal to play in GOAT format. In fact, my personal GOAT format house rule is that you're allowed to play with OCG only DM cards. This is something we're going to see pop up more in the future, and I might even make a whole video about it. On the same day as the release of Dark Duel Stories, Konami released a strategy guide for the game, which came bundled with Right Arm of the Forbidden One. Slowly, Exodia is coming together. At this point in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, here's what my ideal deck might have been. Yeah, this would have involved buying quite a few copies of the Game Boy game. That's all for today. Join me next time as we discuss the arrival of a very powerful demon, the chaos that occurred at Tokyo Dome, the Great Ritual Monster flop, the emergence of Exodia, the first OTK deck, and more. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe and leave a comment. Feel free to let me know if I've made any mistakes in this video and if there's anything that can be improved. Until next time.